On a chilly afternoon in Riverview Park, Officer David Rogers was on patrol. The winter sun was a pale orb in the sky, casting long shadows over the bare trees and icy paths. The park buzzed with activity, families bundled up in coats, children laughing as they played, and the crunch of footsteps on the frosty ground. David, an experienced officer, walked his usual route through the park, his eyes trained to spot any signs of trouble. It felt like a typical day, but fate had something unexpected in store. David had spent nearly a decade in law enforcement. The city felt like home, its rhythms and moods were as familiar as his own heartbeat. He valued the sense of purpose and the duty to protect the community. Today, the park was particularly busy, with families strolling along the paths, their voices mixing with the distant honking of geese on the frozen pond. As David patrolled, he noticed a group of children playing near the playground. They ran and laughed, their joy evident in their rosy cheeks. Among them, a young girl with curly hair caught his eye. She seemed younger, around 7 or 8, wearing a bright red coat that contrasted against the snow-dusted ground. She was hesitant, hanging back as the older kids ventured onto the playground equipment. David's experience made him vigilant. He knew how quickly a fun day could turn dangerous, especially for children unfamiliar with the hazards of the outdoors. The group moved toward the ice-covered pond, and the little girl followed cautiously. David's focus sharpened. He had seen this scenario before, a child eager to join in but unaware of the dangers. Suddenly, the girl ventured too close to the edge of the pond, her small feet slipping on the ice. She lost her balance and fell hard. For a moment, she lay still, stunned. Then, as she began to cry, David sprang into action. He jogged over, his breath visible in the cold air. "It's okay," David said, his voice calm and reassuring as he knelt beside her. "You're going to be fine." The girl clung to him, her small hands cold and trembling. As he helped her up, his gaze fell on the scarf wrapped around her neck. It was a delicate, knitted scarf, a pattern of soft blues and grays. David's heart skipped a beat. The scarf was unmistakably familiar, identical to one he had given his younger sister years ago. He stared, memories flooding back, memories of a similar scarf he had knitted for his sister for her 10th birthday, a token of his affection. But shortly after, she disappeared, leaving an unfillable void and unanswered questions in their family. David snapped back to the present, focusing on the girl and her parents, who had rushed over, faces pale with concern. They thanked him profusely as he gently brushed snow from the girl's coat. "That scarf," he began, his voice hushed amidst the park's noise, "where did she get it?" The parents exchanged puzzled glances before the mother answered. "It was given to her when we adopted her. It was one of her few possessions." A cold shiver ran down David's spine. The likelihood seemed incredible, yet the evidence was undeniable, hanging around her neck like a beacon from the past. He needed to know more but realized it wasn't the time or place for such questions. For now, he nodded, his mind racing. As the family led the girl away, David watched them go, the significance of the day's events sinking in. The park, once just a place of work, had become the start of an unforeseen journey. Looking out at the snow-covered paths, David felt a spark of hope, fragile but persistent, like the memory of his sister, glinting against the odds. Back at the station, David finished his shift, distracted by the revelations of the day. Normally, he would debrief with his colleagues, but tonight he was introspective, preoccupied with the possibilities that the scarf suggested. As the station grew quiet, David made a decision. He had to speak to the girl's parents to uncover more about her story and the origins of the scarf. He found them near the park entrance, the girl now bundled up in a thick blanket, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. Her parents were speaking softly to her, their expressions a mix of lingering worry and relief. David approached cautiously, aware that his questions might seem intrusive, but driven by a need for answers. "Excuse me," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I'm sorry to bother you again, but I was wondering if we could talk more about your daughter's scarf." The parents looked up, surprised but curious. "Yes," the mother nodded, offering a polite smile. "Of course. Is something wrong?" David hesitated, then chose to be direct. "The scarf, it's identical to one I gave my sister years ago. She disappeared when she was about your daughter's age, and we've been searching for answers ever since." Seeing that scarf today was unexpected. The parents exchanged a look, their concern deepening. The father spoke first, his voice measured. "That must be difficult. Our daughter was adopted about 3 years ago. The scarf was among the few items she had with her." David felt a surge of mixed emotions, hope, anxiety, disbelief. "Do you know anything about her birth family or where she was before the adoption?" The mother shook her head. "The adoption agency told us she was found alone. There wasn't much information about her origins." The girl, who had been listening quietly, looked up at David with wide eyes. Her small hands clutched the blanket's edges. "Why are you asking about my scarf?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. David knelt down, his voice gentle. "Because it looks just like one my sister used to wear. It was very special to her, just like yours is to you." The girl glanced down at the scarf, then back at David. "I've always had it. I don't remember getting it." David nodded, his mind racing. He turned to the parents, his voice earnest. "I know this might sound odd, but is there any way we could do a DNA test? Just to see if there's a connection." The parents hesitated, clearly taken aback. The father finally spoke, his tone cautious. "We need some time to think about this. It's a big step, especially for our daughter." David understood. It was a lot to ask, especially with no certainty of the outcome. "I understand. Please, take your time. Here's my contact information," he said, handing them a card. "If you decide to go through with it, let me know. No pressure, really. It's just, I have to know if there's a chance." The parents nodded, sympathetic but protective of their daughter. "We'll discuss it as a family," the mother said gently. "And we'll let you know." With a final thank you and a wave to the girl, David walked away, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. The park was nearly empty now, the sky deepening into twilight. A strange mix of hope and fear filled him, the possibility of finding his sister and the uncertainty of what the DNA test might reveal. Back at home, David sat on his porch, watching the stars emerge in the night sky. The quiet was soothing, but his thoughts were turbulent. He thought of his sister, the years they had lost, and the slim but real possibility that she might be closer than he ever imagined. The next few days were a blur of anticipation and doubt. David went about his duties in the park, but his thoughts were constantly with the girl and the scarf. He replayed every detail of their conversation, wondering if he had made the right decision by asking for the test. Would it disturb the girl's life or her new family? He hoped not, but he couldn't ignore the pull of the past, the need to know if his sister was still out there, even if she had moved on. Finally, the call came. The girl's parents had decided to go ahead with the DNA test. They were cautious but understanding, wanting to resolve the mystery for everyone's sake. David felt a wave of relief and nervous anticipation. The test was arranged quickly, and then came the waiting, each day seeming longer than the last. As the days passed, David reflected on the nature of family, the bonds that connect us across time and distance. He thought about his sister, the little girl she had been, and the woman she might have become. He also thought about the girl in the park, wondering if she had inherited their family's resilience. When the results finally arrived, David opened the envelope with trembling hands, his heart pounding. The answer was clear and undeniable. He read it once, then again, hardly daring to believe. The girl was his niece. His sister had been found. David felt a rush of emotions, joy, relief, a deep sadness for the lost years, but also a profound sense of hope. There was a chance to reconnect, to bridge the gap that time and circumstances had created. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, David felt a sense of clarity and purpose. The city, vast and unpredictable, had brought him a piece of his family. Now it was up to him to see where this new path would lead. David's hands shook as he held the DNA test results. The little girl from the park, the one with the scarf that had tugged at his heartstrings, was indeed his niece. His missing sister had a child, an undeniable link to the family he had feared he would never find again. The realization was overwhelming. All these years of searching, of wondering, and now the truth was right before him. His sister might be gone, but a part of her lived on in this young girl. David's mind raced with questions. What had happened to his sister? Where was she now? And how had her daughter ended up in the care of this family? He knew he needed to approach the situation with care. The little girl had a new family who loved and protected her, and he couldn't just waltz into their lives and disrupt everything. But he also couldn't ignore the bond that tied them together. He had to know more about his sister's fate and build a relationship with his niece, no matter how complicated it might be. David reached out to the girl's adoptive parents. They were surprised but understanding when he shared the results. The mother, Sarah, and the father, Michael, were cautious yet compassionate, recognizing the importance of family ties while also wanting to protect their daughter's well-being. We've always known that she might have family out there, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. But she's our daughter now, and her safety and happiness are our top priorities. David nodded, fully aware of the delicate balance they needed to maintain. I understand, and I don't want to disrupt your lives. I'm just grateful to know she's safe and loved. But I'd also like to learn more about what happened to my sister, if that's possible. Michael, thoughtful as ever, spoke next. We can work together to find those answers. But we need to be careful with how we involve her in this. She's still young, and we don't want to overwhelm her. David agreed, appreciating their protective instincts. I'm not in any rush. I just want to be part of her life, even if it's in a small way for now. They discussed how to proceed, deciding to take things slow. The girl's parents would gradually introduce the idea of her having another relative, someone who cared about her deeply. Over time, they would share more about David and his connection to her, letting her absorb the information at her own pace. In the meantime, David began his search for answers about his sister. He contacted the adoption agency, digging into the records they had on the girl's history. Though the information was sparse, David learned that his sister had indeed passed away, but not before ensuring that her daughter was placed in a safe and loving home. The details of her death were vague, leaving David with more questions than answers, but at least he knew she had done everything she could to protect her child. David found solace in the fact that his sister's last act had been one of love and sacrifice. She had ensured her daughter's safety, even if it meant parting ways with her. It was a bittersweet revelation, but it gave David a sense of closure. His sister was gone, but she had left behind a legacy, a little girl who was now part of his life. Weeks turned into months as David slowly integrated into his niece's life. Sarah and Michael were supportive, carefully explaining to their daughter that she had an uncle who cared about her very much. The girl was curious but cautious, asking questions in her own time and gradually warming up to the idea of having a new family member. David didn't push. He visited when invited, spending time with the family in the park, at their home, and on occasional outings. He was patient, letting his niece set the pace. She was shy at first, but as she got to know him, she began to open up, sharing stories about school, friends, and her favorite activities. David cherished these moments, feeling a connection to his niece that grew stronger with each passing day. He saw glimpses of his sister in her, the way she smiled, the determination in her eyes, and her gentle spirit. It was as if his sister was still with him, living on through her daughter. As time went on, David became more involved in his niece's life. He attended her school events, celebrated birthdays, and even started teaching her some of the hobbies he and his sister had enjoyed as kids, like knitting and hiking. They shared stories about their family, with David carefully crafting tales that honored his sister's memory while also making room for the new life his niece had built with her adoptive parents. The bond between them deepened, and with it came a sense of healing for David. The years of searching, the pain of not knowing, began to fade as he embraced his role as an uncle. He found joy in the present, in the moments they shared, and in the knowledge that his sister's love had not been lost, it had been passed down to the next generation. A future together. One day, as David and his niece walked through the park where they had first met, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Uncle David," she began, her voice soft, "do you think my mom, your sister, would be happy to know we're together now?" David's heart swelled with emotion. He knelt down to her level, taking her small hand in his. "I think she would be very happy," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "She loved you so much, and she wanted you to be safe and happy. I think she's watching over us right now, smiling because we found each other." The girl smiled, her eyes shining with tears she didn't fully understand. "I'm glad we're together too," she whispered, hugging him tightly. David held her close, feeling the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. His journey had been long and difficult, filled with uncertainty and loss. But it had led him here, to this moment, where he could finally find peace. As they walked on, hand in hand, David looked out at the park, the place where his search had begun and where it had finally ended. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the sun cast a warm glow over the path ahead. For the first time in years, David felt a sense of contentment, knowing that the future, though uncertain, was filled with hope and love. And in that moment, surrounded by the simple beauty of the world, David knew that he had found what he had been searching for all along, a family, a connection, and the promise of new beginnings. As David settled into his role as an uncle, the bond between him and his niece grew stronger. They shared countless moments together, and the love that he felt for her deepened with each passing day. However, despite the sense of closure David had found, there was still a lingering question about his sister's fate that he couldn't shake off. One day, as David was going through some of the documents he had gathered from the adoption agency, he came across something that caught his attention, a name, listed as a contact in case of emergency. It wasn't his sister's name, but it was eerily familiar. His heart raced as he did some research, reaching out to contacts and making inquiries. What he discovered shocked him to his core. His sister, Rachel, wasn't dead. She had been alive all this time, living under a different name, working in a small town not too far from where David lived. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance were complicated. Rachel had been involved in a dangerous situation that forced her to go into hiding, leaving her daughter in the care of the adoption agency to protect her. David was stunned. His sister had been alive all these years, and now, he had a chance to reunite with her. But what would that mean for his niece, who had grown up thinking her birth mother was gone? After much deliberation, David decided to reach out to Rachel. He contacted her, explaining who he was and the situation with her daughter. The moment Rachel heard her brother's voice, she broke down in tears. She had thought she would never see her family again, had resigned herself to a life of solitude for the sake of her child's safety. But now, with the danger long past, there was a chance to reconnect with the family she had lost. They arranged to meet in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. The reunion was emotional, filled with tears and long overdue hugs. Rachel explained everything, how she had been forced to leave her old life behind, how she had watched from afar as her daughter was placed with a new family, how she had hoped that one day, she could come back for her. David listened, his heart breaking for the sister he had thought he lost. But there was also joy, knowing that she was alive and that they could start to rebuild their relationship. The next step was the hardest. They had to figure out how to tell Rachel's daughter the truth. Sarah and Michael, the girl's adoptive parents, were supportive but cautious. They agreed that Rachel should be the one to tell her daughter the truth, but it had to be done carefully, to ensure the girl wasn't overwhelmed or confused. Rachel was nervous as she prepared to meet her daughter for the first time in years. She knew that this moment would change everything, and she didn't want to cause her daughter any pain. With David and the adoptive parents by her side, Rachel sat down with her daughter and gently explained the truth. The girl was stunned at first, struggling to process the information. She had always believed her birth mother was gone, and now, here she was, alive and sitting right in front of her. There were tears and confusion, but also a deep sense of curiosity and longing. Rachel didn't push her, letting her daughter take the time she needed to come to terms with everything. Over the next few weeks, Rachel slowly integrated herself into her daughter's life, building a relationship from scratch. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and fear, and times when the girl pulled away, unsure of how to feel. But Rachel was patient, giving her daughter the space she needed, while also being there whenever she was ready to talk or spend time together. David watched as his niece began to open up to Rachel, the bond between mother and daughter growing stronger with each passing day. It was a slow process, but it was also beautiful to see, a family that had been torn apart by circumstances now coming back together. Months passed, and the new family dynamic began to settle. Rachel and her daughter were closer than ever, and the girl had two sets of loving parents who were fully supportive of each other. David, too, found himself at peace, knowing that his sister was safe and that they had a future together as a family. The once lonely park where David had first encountered his niece was now a place of joy and laughter. The girl ran around with her friends, with Rachel, David, and her adoptive parents all watching over her with smiles on their faces. One day, as they all sat together for a picnic, the girl looked around at the people who loved her, the people who had come together, despite all the odds, to make sure she had a happy life. "I'm so lucky," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I have the best family in the world." David smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. "We're the lucky ones," he replied, reaching out to ruffle her hair. Rachel leaned over and hugged her daughter, whispering, "We love you more than anything in the world." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, the family sat together, enjoying the moment. There had been hardships and heartache, but they had come out stronger on the other side. And now, they had a future filled with hope, love, and the promise of many more happy days to come. If you enjoy this story, kindly like and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Teen Success 23724. For more.